Altai, would you like to start?
Well, welcome everybody. We are very pleased to have you in our next edition of the Seleukid lecture series. And Ben is actually going to introduce our speaker today, Professor Alain Bresson. Ben?
Okay. So, Dr. Bresson really doesn't need an introduction. He was professor in the Department of Classics at the University of Chicago, and he's now Robert O. Anderson Distinguished Service Professor Emeritus in the Departments of Classics and History in the Oriental Institute and in the college. He's a premier historian of the ancient world with particular interest in the ancient economy, the Hellenistic world, and the epigraphy of Rhodes and Asia Minor. And among his many awards and publications, he was awarded the James Breasted Prize by the American Historical Association in 2017 for his very famous book, The Making of the Ancient Greek Economy. It's a great honor and pleasure to introduce our speaker on the intriguing topic, asking the penetrating question, were the Seleukids really wealthy? Dr. Bresson.
Thank you, Ben. First of all, I would like to thank you, Ben, and to thank Altai for your invitation. It's a great honor, it's a great pleasure to be with you this morning in America, or this afternoon in Europe, or somewhere else, maybe later. Thank you also, Oliver, for accepting being to be my respondent. It's a great honor indeed to present some of my views on some aspects of the history of the Seleukid kingdom. As you know well, I'm not a specialist of the Seleukid kingdom, but I met the Seleukids several times during when I was treating this or that question on some epigraphic or numismatic dossier. This is also deliberately an essay in macro history. I have nothing against micro history. I think it's very useful. I do myself a lot of micro history, publishing documents, or writing this or that regional dossier on a longue durée, etc. But I think there is also a place for macro history, and I hope that you will like what I'm about to say about the Seleukids. Thus, if I can go to the first slide, well, the Seleukids, as you see, with a question mark, or do we really need a question mark? Yes, this next one. Well, the Seleukids with no question mark. Yeah. Indeed, the question mark seems unnecessary. Of course, yes, the next one. Okay, no, this one, okay. Of course, the Seleukids were rich, and who could doubt that? Next one. In his book for a general audience, The Fall of Carthage, Adrian Goldsworthy gives this comment. It's about the situation of the Seleukids after the peace of Apamea. An indemnity of 15,000 talent was to be paid to Rome, more than had been remitted from Carthage, but not an impossible sum for the wealthy Seleucids. We find more or less the same view in Vivian Bazin's article. For instance, in 2006, the Seleucids were rich from both taxation and the revenue of their royal estates, at least before Magnesia. So it seems to be a difference between, it seems self-evident that the Seleucids were rich, but there is a nuance. They were less rich, at least after Magnesia. So the question was indeed, how is it possible? How could the Seleukid not have been rich? Can we switch, yes, to the next slide? Thank you. My master, Georges Le Rider, and Georges Le Rider and one of the people present in this audience, distinguished François de Calatayud, published also a book in 2006, Les Seleucides et les Ptolémées. Here, in the two articles by Georges Le Rider, who was my master in some way, and in the common book with François de Calatayud, we have the same view. Georges Le Rider, that was not even convinced that after Apamea, the Seleucid kingdom was in such a difficult situation. And why? Analyzing the production of the Seleukid mints and the continuity of Seleucid strikes after Apameia, not to mention Antiochus IV's lavish parade at Daphne in 166, Georges Laurier was convinced that the kingdom remained very rich even after 188. So it seems that we should reformulate the question and ask, how could the Seleucids not have been rich? They managed to establish their control over an immense territory. Next slide. Yes, at the death of Seleucus I in 281, the Seleukid possessions extended from the Aegean to the eastern Iranian plateau. We'll come back to this map later. And many maps provided in publication for a general audience or on the web seem to confirm the impression that this was a gigantic empire. The only empire that was more or less similar to that, or even bigger, was that of the Achaemenids. Next slide. And we observed that, yes, indeed, the Achaemenid Empire was a bit bigger, but more or less it had the same extension. And given that, famously, the Achaemenid Empire was fabulously rich, it seems incontrovertible that the same definition should apply to the Seleucid kingdom. And the view have some truth, for the Seleucid kingdom also controlled the regions at the heartland of the former Persian Empire. Iran, Mesopotamia, northern Syria, the core of the system were the same between the two empires. Next slide. Numbers provided by ancient sources regarding the income or the revenue of several kings may also give us an idea of the wealth of the Seleucids. According to Herodotus, the tribute paid to the great king annually reached the amount of 9,390 cubic talents of silver. We must assume that the 360 talents of gold dust from India given by Herodotus actually corresponded to a value in silver. So this is why this is not a total of 15-something thousand that are used here, but a total of a little above 9,000 cubic talents, which is still gigantic amount for the yearly revenue of the great king. According to Justin, Alexander had a revenue of 30,000 talents a year. According to Diodorus, Antigonus, when he was in control of Asia in 316, received 11,000 talents in tribute. Antigonus did not control Egypt, which may explain the difference, among others, with the numbers for Alexander. For Jerome, Ptolemy received 14,800 talents from Egypt, with, in addition, 1.5 million artabai of grain. And for Strabo, Ptolemy Alice received an income of 12,500 Ptolemaic talents, so a little less, of course, but yet a very big amount, let's say around 10,000 cubic talents. So our ancient sources do not provide numbers for the revenue of the Seleucid Empire, but modern historians have provided estimates that match those given by ancient sources for the other large kingdoms. Marquis Sapergis estimates that Seleucid revenues reached a first peak of 14 to 19,000 talents at the end of the reign of Seleucus I, and the second one probably higher, approaching 15,000 to 20,000 talents under the reign of Antiochus III before Apameia. Christelle Fischer-Beauvais thinks that the Ptolemies collected 14,000 to 16 talents per year from their subject, and the Seleucids 14 to 19 talents. That means that the Seleucids received more money than the Ptolemies. So a first inevitable conclusion seems to be that not only the Seleucids were rich, but that they were even the richest of all Hellenistic kings, which should not surprise us, given that they were the heirs of the Achaemenid Persians, who were extraordinarily rich. Well, at this point, we could stop our investigation. Seleucids were wealthy. That's it. Yet, two episodes of the history of the Seleucid Empire do not seem to fit with this image and even provide a serious warning against too hasty conclusions. We have two perplexing cases. The first case, yes, thank you, is provided by the famous text of Polybius in Book 5, relating to the help provided by a series of rulers to the city of Rhodes after the devastating earthquake of around 227 BCE. Very cleverly, the Rhodians organized a kind of competition between their prospective benefactors. Polybius mentions that there was a long list of cities and dynasts that provided help, but he gives detailed numbers for 4 of them only: the kings of Syracuse, Jalon and Hieron II, Ptolemy III, Antigonos Darson and his wife Chryseis, and Seleucus II. Next slide. The gifts consist in donation in kind, such as grain, timber, and a series of equipment materials for rebuilding the fleet, the walls, or the arsenal. There are also donations in silver and even in coin bronze to produce locally small change to pay the workers. This is quite a disparate collection. I tried to convert all data in terms of silver money based on the prices available for the period, especially those available at Delos. There is inevitably a certain degree of uncertainty for the detail, but the general picture would not be changed if we had slightly different prices for some of the raw materials. For grain, I've provided 2 estimates of prices for the medimnos of grain, one at 2 drachms per medimnos, another one at 4 drachms. But even so, the global picture doesn't change radically. Next slide. A first observation, this is what I've translated in terms of, if you convert everything in terms of silver value, this is what you get. So the difference between the blue and the red is explained by the price you give for the grain. For Series 1, it's 2 drachms per medimnos, and Series 2 is 4 drachms per medimnos. But anyway, a first observation is that Ptolemy III is by far the most generous donor, with the equivalent of 737 or 1995 talents of silver. The 2 second tied are the kingdom of Macedon and the Seleucid kingdom, more or less at the same level, depending on the price that we choose for the grain they provide. The last one is the kingdom of Syracuse, but which doesn't lag far behind. Of course, the surprise comes from the ranking of the kingdoms of Seleucus II, which intuitively one would have ranked much higher, more or less at the level of the Ptolemaic kingdom. Well, there could be several explanations for this situation. The exceptional generosity of Ptolemy III could be explained by the traditional excellent relations between Rhodes and the Ptolemaic Empire. The king would have wanted to surpass all his rivals. There could be also an ad hoc explanation for the comparatively low value of the Seleucid donations. Seleucus II was then only completing his reconquista of Asia Minor and did not have much, maybe large resources available in terms of cash, because he had spent his money to pay soldiers or because he preferred to keep it for the next campaigns. But the fact that the gift of Seleucus II were only at the level of those of Antigonos Darson remains perplexing. A second, next slide, and the next one also. Okay, and then we stop. A second observation that the Seleucid king does not provide cash in silver at all. This is the proportion. It gives you, in the blue is money, grain is red, and the rest, raw material, weapons, etc., in green. If you observe that Yaron and Jalon do not give grain, not because they did not produce grain, but I suspect because the Romans didn't want them to send grain to the east, because the grain of Sicily by the time was really it's a privilege of the Roman people. Anyway, so only money, only cash almost only cash for the kingdom of Syracuse. As for Ptolemy, it's more balanced, although the gifts in grain represent something major, but he gives money in cash. Antigonos gives more cash than, let's say, value in grain. But as for Seleucus, there is no cash at all. So this, as I already said, this doesn't mean that Seleucus had no cash in 227, but maybe he didn't want to give cash at this time. Well, which might suggest that his reserves were not immensely large. Next slide. The case of the Seleukid indemnity to Rome. Yes, the second perplexing case is the payment of the indemnity following the Peace of Apamea. Next slide. So the Romans, I don't read the text of Polybius, you can read by yourself. The Romans exacted that Antiochus had to pay 12,000 talents, with in addition 540,000 modi of grain. The grain, let's say a word about that, was the equivalent of around 90,000 Attic medimnoi, and this was not a very large amount. It had a value of around 260 drachms, at 4 drachms, the medimnos, or the equivalent of around 60 talents. On his own free will, in 227, Seleucus had given the equivalent of over 133 talents. So why this payment in grain? Because obviously the Roman army was still present in Asia Minor, operating in the region, and the Romans wanted Antiochus to pay for this their campaigns, operating still in 88, 87, 188, 187 in Asia Minor. But this is not the core of the indemnity. The core of the indemnity is the 12,000 talents of silver that had to be paid in 12 years. As for Eumenes, the indemnity in cash amounted to a little over 477 talents. So, given that before the peace, Antiochus already had to pay 3,000 talents to the Romans, the grand total was almost 15,500 talents, of which a little over 3,000 talents, or nearly 21%, were paid immediately. We should comment in detail, maybe if you want to later in the discussion, the Apamea settlement. We'll come back to that. But, next slide. There should be no doubt that the Seleucids were late in their payments to Rome. If the first payment was to be made in 188, the 12th payment should have been made in 177-76. But in 173, according to Livy, Antiochus IV had to excuse himself for not paying his tribute, stipendium, in time. There should be no debate that the stipendium here does not refer to the whole indemnity, but to the yearly payment or a yearly payment. There is debate among scholars, but I think that it's very clear. And still in 165, according to 2 Maccabees, 8 and 36, Antiochus owed money to Rome. So I think that the delay in payment is beyond doubt. Next slide. We have also various cases of temple plunder that are really perplexing. The first one, as early as 11 to 10 BCE, is that of Antiochus III. When he was campaigning in Media, he plundered the temple of Aini in Ecbatana, and he made a huge profit of 4,000 talents. Just a note in passing, we are on Seleukid territory, and Ecbatana is one of the traditional capitals of the Achaemenids, or if you like, also of the Seleukids. What they plunder is not plundering in enemy territory. It's plundering a sanctuary which is located in one of the main provinces of his own kingdom. It's worth mentioning in passing. And the same is true for what we'll see later for Jerusalem or the Jewish state. In 187, Antiochus III plundered the temple of Baal in Elam, again, Seleukid possession, but he was killed by the local people who were furious against him. This is 1 year after Apamea. Around 180, Heliodorus, the envoy of Seleucus IV in Jerusalem, apparently managed to seize from the temple 400 talents in silver and 200 gold talents, roughly the equivalent of 2,000 silver talents. In 169 or 168, Antiochus IV plundered the temple of Jerusalem, gaining a profit of 1,800 talents of silver. And in 164, the same Antiochus IV attempted to plunder the temple of Nanaya in Elam. And in addition, and thank you, Ben, for this suggestion, Seleucus IV, Antiochus IV also put pressure on Onias IV, Jason, and Menelaus to produce more revenue, causing much turmoil in the years 175, 162. And besides, they kept replacing high priests who promised bigger sums. It's a sale of priesthoods within the circle of the priest of Jerusalem. So it's a symptom of something that they needed money. So it may seem tempting, at least, to establish a link between the difficulties to pay the indemnity owed to Rome and these expedients of Antiochus or Seleucus IV or Antiochus IV. Several scholars, such as Georges Loridaire and recently Hellenic Krikona, have rejected this hypothesis as being implausible. Yes, indeed, Antiochus III didn't wait for the post-Apameian period to plunder a temple. Even after Apamea, the kingdom of Antiochus have remained very wealthy. All the more so, it had recently acquired in 200 BCE the rich coast of southern Syria with Tyre, Sidon, and Judea, etc. Besides, Georges Loridaire insisted that the monetary production under Seleucus IV did not betray traces of financial difficulties. Maybe this is far from certain, and Oliver might express his views on this. The weight of the coins was not modified, the purity of the metal was not altered. That was the core argument of Georges Loridaire. But next slide. Another interpretation of these series of blunders could be that the financial difficulties were not created, but only worsened by the indemnity that Antiochus had to pay to Rome. 2 Maccabees establishes an explicit link between the payment of the indemnity to Rome and the sale of Jews into slavery. Nicanor determined to make up for the king the tribute due to the Romans, 2,000 talents, by selling the captured Jews into slavery. Also, 36, he who had undertaken to secure tribute for the Romans by the capture of the people of Jerusalem proclaimed that the Jews had a defender, and that therefore the Jews were invulnerable because they followed the laws ordained by him. Apparently, not refrain from establishing a link between the payment of the indemnity to Rome and financial expedients, such as the sale of Jewish enslaved populations. This also invites to accept the hypothesis of financial difficulties to explain the delay of the debt due to Rome. Next slide. So let's revisit together the case of wealthy Seleukids. Beyond the case of the indemnity to be paid to Rome, one must revisit the too easy assumption that the Seleucid kingdom was immensely rich and even the richest among the Hellenistic kingdoms. We'll do so by examining two questions. Firstly, the extension of the Seleucid Empire, Seleucid kingdom, and secondly, the volume and nature of its monetary issues. First, next slide. The territorial extension of Seleucid kingdom. Well, for the territorial expansion of the Seleucid kingdom, a comparison with the Achaemenid Empire reveals several differences. After Darius, the Achaemenids lost some territories. Macedonia, Thrace, and Cyrenaica were lost under Xerxes. The control over the Indus Valley seems to have been very loose. Egypt was lost at the end of the 5th century, but after several attempts, it was recovered in 343 under Artaxerxes III. In 334, at the time of the beginning of Alexander's conquest, in terms of geographic extension, the Persian Empire was just only marginally smaller than that at the end of the 6th century. Next slide. A comparison between territories of the Achaemenids and that of the Seleucid kingdom shows many differences. The northern and central part of Asia Minor were never under Seleucid control, and the same is true for Armenia and Atropatene. Actually, for Armenia, for a while, it was a bit, for a short period of time, under the control of the Seleucids, but it didn't last very long under Antiochus III. As for Egypt, an exceptionally rich region, the Seleucids managed to subjugate it only when it was too late under Antiochus IV, and they could not keep it. But even for the territories on which Seleucus had established his dominion, their evolution can be compared to that of a magic skin that constantly shrinks over time. Next slide. Yes, Seleucus himself lost the Indus Valley and its neighboring regions of Arachosia, Chedrosia, Parupamisadai to Chandragupta in 303 BCE. Next slide. In 245, Bactria was lost with the revolt of Diodotus. At the same time, or a little later, Arsaces became king of a de facto independent kingdom of Parthia. And Bactria was a very rich region in terms of agriculture, but also as a source of precious metal. Next slide. In the 2nd century, the heaviest gold coins ever struck in antiquity, the 20 status coin weighing 169.2 grams, were minted by King Akratides of Bactria. Next slide. At the very moment when the eastern provinces were lost, began a series of secessions and usurpations that shook the kingdom, that of Antiochus Hierax between 245 and 226, a period during which Asia Minor was temporarily lost for the legitimate king Seleucus II, which meant not only a net loss of revenue, but large cost to reconquer the province. The secession of Molon between 222 and 220 in central Mesopotamia, the secession of Archaios, again in Asia Minor, between 220 and 213. And Boris Shrubasek has underlined the, I quote, high instability at the center of Seleucid power, to the Seleucid king constantly trying to hold the kingdom together. This instability also had a financial impact. Whole regions were temporarily lost a source of income, and where even a burden as they had to be constantly reconquered. Next slide. What about the Seleukid coin minting and monetary policy? The Seleukids minted gold and bronze and silver in various quantities, and in large quantities, in some way in various proportions, according to their several mints, which, according to the period, were scattered all over the empire. But in which volumes? Panagiotis Iosif, in an article of 2015, estimates that in the period around 300 to around 240 to 35, the average coin annual production was 180 talents, which is a strangely low production for such a huge empire. Admittedly, in parallel, one should remember that the Seleucid kingdom was an open space and that coins from all provenances could circulate within its border. This is what you see in this, let's say, this graph. We have three colors: Asia Minor in blue, Levant and Syria in green, Mesopotamia in orange, and it gives you the proportion of Seleukid coins to the whole circulation of coins. So it means that, for instance, in the period 300 to 75, in Asia Minor, there were less than 10% of Seleukid coins, very few, 5% in Levant and Syria, and little less than, little below 30% in Mesopotamia, etc. So you see this, the ratio of Seleukid coins from the coin circulating to the coin circulating in the kingdom varies quite a lot. It tends to be larger over time, very slow at the beginning and larger over time, and it reaches proportions, let's say ratios, around 30–50% only in the period 175–150 BCE, before reaching well over 50 after 150 BCE. But in a period when the kingdom massively shrank and adopted a completely different monetary policy. Next slide. By comparison, the annual production of the Ptolemies was between 377 and 475 talents, according to Panos Iosif, which gives the impression that, at first look, that the Ptolemaic kingdom was richer than the Seleukid kingdom, 377 to 180 talents. But Panos Iosif counters the argument by rightly pointing that there was a constant import of fresh coins into the Seleukid kingdoms. Otherwise, the proportion of Seleukid coins would have massively increased. So that he admits that with a ratio of 50% between Seleukid and foreign coins, there must have been a minimum of, let's say, 555 talents per year incoming or produced within the Seleukid kingdom, which would be higher than the 475 talents of the Ptolemies. Thus, in fact, on this basis only, the Seleukids would have been richer than their rival. The argument is well made. But there remains at least a big difference between the two kingdoms, the huge area covered by the Seleukid kingdom and the much limited one of the Ptolemies. So the monetary strike force, if you like, of the Seleukids was thus inevitably lower than that of their rivals. We shall probably will come back in discussion maybe on this ratio of Seleukid, non-Seleukid coins in the money supply in the Seleukid kingdom, but anyway, we'll see that. However, let me add something. A symptom of the difference between the Ptolemaic and Seleukid coin minting is the volume of gold issues. Next slide. Whilst this is a Seleukid stater of Seleucus the First from the mint of Tarsus. There was initially a high amount of production of gold under Seleukid and Seleucus IV, and you see that also with the next slide. Next, the number of mints minting gold under Seleucus the First, so a large volume and many mints from Tarsus to Iran minting gold. Next slide. Let's go directly to Antiochus IV. This is the state of Antiochus IV. Antiochus IV still minted gold, but in very small volume. Next slide. And only at one mint, the mint of Antioch. You see the little circle and the mint of Antioch. There's a big difference in gold minting. And by losing Bactria after 245 and also northwestern Asia Minor for long periods after 245 and definitively after 189, the Seleucids also lost quick, direct access to very rich gold sources, which inevitably impacted their income and their ability to strike gold. But gold is very important because under a small volume, it has a very high value. I believe that Antiochus III certainly understood the situation, and that this justifies his attempt to reconquer the lost provinces in the east and in the west. In the east, the alleged success of the Anabasis certainly concealed an impossibility to really reconquer these regions. In the west, he was more successful. The defeat against Rome, well, definitively sealed the fate of this Western Reconquista. The fact that, unlike the Ptolemies, the Seleucids chose not to remit all the coins coming to their territories lowered the cost of management of their money supply, no doubt. But it might well have also deprived them of the possibility to control this money supply very closely, the way it was done by the Ptolemies. And this is one of the reasons why they were not able to maximize their sources of income. Moreover, next slide, in all likelihood, the Seleucids had to spend much more money than the Ptolemies to fund their army. Christelle Fischer-Beauvais opposes the recruitment of the Ptolemaic army to that of the Seleukid one. The Ptolemies made a large use of cleric soldiers, who as such didn't receive a payment from the state in peacetime. And by contrast, the Seleucids had to pay large sums to their soldiers, even in peacetime. She calculates that, you see the difference, 4,500 to 5,700 talents for the Ptolemies as the cost of the army in peacetime, whereas for the Seleucids it was between 7,000 and 8,000 or almost 9,000 talents per year. So there was a drain from the army, which was much higher for the Seleucids than for the Ptolemies. Let's switch directly to the conclusion. Of course, the Seleucid kingdom was not poor. Previous one, we don't need that for now. Okay, the Seleucid kingdom, thank you. The Seleucid kingdom was not poor. It had huge resources in men, in grain, and in raw material products on which it could levy tribute. It could also levy taxes in precious metal coinage. But the kingdom also faced huge military expenses. Moreover, the early loss of several key provinces negatively impacted its capacity to access rich sources of precious metal. The necessity to reconquer over and over secessionist provinces also had a huge financial impact. with also the structure of its military recruitment, the kingdom found itself permanently unable to accumulate reserves that would have matched those of its main opponent, the Ptolemaic kingdom. This suffices to explain the fact that it was also permanently in need of cash before 188 and after that date also, even more maybe after that date. The donations exclusively in kind to Rhodes in 227 BCE and the frequent plunders of temples are not mere coincidence or exceptions. They translate the permanently insufficient reserves of cash of the Seleucid central state, which was one of its major weaknesses. And now the last slide, pardon. A comparison with the reserves of the Achaemenid predecessors shows this eloquently. Eloquently, in 336, the Achaemenids had in their reserves in gold and silver about 275 talents in silver value. Some of it they inherited from their predecessors, but this means that year in, year out, they were able to accumulate over 1,000 talents in precious metal. I don't say it was every year 1,000 talents more, but the result was that over 200 years, they were able to accumulate more than 1,000 talents of silver, in equivalent silver per year. And they had a huge reserves of cash at the start of Alexander's campaign. As for the Seleukids, they were unable to, they didn't have reserves of that level, or maybe no reserves at all, a few thousand maybe talents of silver, but certainly not huge reserves, even less than the Ptolemies, because the Ptolemies were able to have to accumulate serious, important reserves, which gave the kingdom a form of stability despite all these vicissitudes until 30 BCE. When Octavian plundered Egypt, there was a huge inflation in Rome, which shows that there was a very large amount of gold and silver still in Alexandria in 30 BCE. Although in this period, the kingdom was far less rich than it had been, let's say, 2 centuries before. So my argument is that this weakness is that this incapacity to accumulate cash reserves was a major weakness of the Seleucid kingdom, and which contribute to explain also the various secessions of provinces, their inability to suppress the revolts, and let's say it explains also the final fate of the kingdom. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Alain. This was an excellent and really stimulating presentation. And before we move on to the open discussion, we have the honor to have Oliver Hoover with us as the expert to give specific feedback. Again, there is not much need to introduce Oliver to a Seleucid audience, because with his co-authorship in the Seleucid coins volume, or the second part of it, published in 2008, he did establish himself as one of the leading experts. But even after that, he did not stay lazy. He has an average book output of 1 per year, and most of them are in his distinguished series of the Ancient Greek coin series. So by now, he is one of the truly most prolific authors on ancient numismatics. And and on top of that, I'm particularly grateful, Oliver, for you taking the time after you've already enriched our series with your presentation in March earlier this year. So we look very much forward to what you have to respond to Alain.
Thank you, Altai, and thank you very much, Alain. This was really an excellent paper, and really glad that you took the opportunity to revisit this question, which for a long time Georges Louridet seemed to have put to rest. I think your examples of temple plunder and the gifts to Rhodes really show that there are problems in the system, and your explanation of the loss of territory and really makes sense. Regarding the gifts to Rhodes, I was taken by your emphasis on the gift of grain and no coins, or no money in cash, and I wonder how much we can emphasize this as an indicator of trouble in the trouble for Seleucus II in coming up with the money, or whether it is also an indicator of the system that the Seleucids had for paying non-military expenses. There's an inscription from Iassos, Iassos 4, which is dated to 196 BC, and it shows the Seleucid queen Laodice making a similar gift of grain, but on a much smaller scale, to the city. She ordered 1,000 medimnoi of wheat to be given annually to Iassos for 10 years, and the Iasians were then supposed to sell the wheat and from the proceeds pay dowries for daughters of poor citizens up to 300 drachmas per individual. If you take that over 10 years at your high rate of 4 drams per medimnos, this amounts to about 40,000 drams, or a little more than 6.5 talents in total, and per year only 4,000 drams. So this is a pretty small sum in royal terms, I think, and it seems to me that it's a little improbable that Antiochus III and the royal household was so strapped for cash in the pre-Apamæan period that the queen couldn't actually come up with less than a talent in silver every year to cover this benefaction. So it makes me wonder whether this is the grain to the Rhodians is illustrating the Seleucid system for dealing with these kinds of expenses, rather than hard proof of the lack of cash on hand. Of course, if it's systematic, the system may have evolved because they don't have cash on hand. But the fact that the inscription from Iassos describes the drams to be paid out as Antiochian, which I assume must mean coins of Antiochus III, that makes me think that there was some expectation that the Iasians could get their hands on Seleucid money to make the payments. So I think there's some ambiguity about how we should take the payment in grain to Rhodes. I don't know if you would agree with that, but
you're perfectly right. And Klaus Brinkmann has already 20 years ago showed that in general Seleucid, Hellenistic kings preferred to give grain, wood, or other raw material or weapons rather than cash. So this is not Seleucid specificity. In general, Hellenistic kingdoms Well, how did they fund their army? I think that we have François de Calatai in the audience, and he proved that, for instance, the Mithridatic armies were also funded, were paid also in grain, in other forms of payment, non-cash payment. So this is a general. So their resources. This is a big question always for them. They received revenue in not in cash, but in grain or other products, and they must convert it into silver or gold to get the strike force that they need. That's true for all. So what they prefer is to give directly what they have. Let's say Laodike, this explains very well. Instead of sending money, well, the royal land is just nearby.
Yeah.
And you send what you have nearby, which is the grain locally produced. This makes perfect sense. Whether it's just a point of detail, whether it's Antiochic, the Antiochic coins, whether they are authentic coins of Antiochus III, that's another point. I'm not sure. It might be also the good coins of the king. It's high value because they had a privilege. The coins of the king had a privilege within the kingdom, certainly, and that's what it means. Whether it was actually coins, because they don't circulate that much. I don't remember the detail but in general, we find very few Antiochic coins or Seleucid coins in general in Asia Minor. But that's another point. So my point was that all the other kingdoms give indeed grain, weapons, etc., but they also give cash, and only the Seleucid said no cash.
Yeah. My point is just that I think this is a bit ambiguous as evidence of Seleucid difficulty in coming up with cash. It might be logistically simpler to hand over the grain. I don't know. Also in your comparison between the gifts, I didn't notice that values were given on the the remission of port taxes, which I imagine they must have been much more substantial for the Seleukids than for what was it? It was Huron and Gelon that also remitted taxes, if I remember correctly on the
Yes, you're right.
on the chart.
Yeah, but the kingdom of Syracuse was much smaller, and for them, in proportion, the ratio must have been. And we have in this period a lot of imports of Rhodian amphorae in Syracuse. So it's not something purely formal, It was really it was also something for the kingdom of Syracuse, losing money in some way for the goods coming from Rhodes.
Yes, I'm just thinking, the Seleucid Empire had quite a lot of ports that would represent a significant amount of money, but we can't really quantify it when comparing against the other gifts that were made to Rhodes.
Yeah,
and so it's hard to. I think it's a little bit hard to be sure. When we have the graph showing rough equivalence between Antigonus and Seleucus II in their gifts, with things like that left out, it's hard to really know how equivalent they really were.
well,
maybe not.
in terms of terms of grain, the quantity of grain is significant, but it's not huge also. I mean,
Yes.
yeah, it's a large gift, but that's lower than that of the Ptolemies once again, which can be explained by many reasons.
Yes. And I think in your discussion about the coinage, I think you were alluding to the apparent weight reduction that occurs under Antiochus the Fourth as evidence of the financial troubles that seem fairly clear from the literary evidence. But at the same time, I think this is also a bit ambiguous, because it's hard to know whether it's really the Roman indemnity causing it, or whether it's the circulation pool, because by this time a lot of the Attic weight Alexanders in the Seleukid circulation pool are more worn than in previous periods. And so the question is, are we reducing the weight in order to match the bulk of the circulation pool? Because if we start striking coins of full value, of full weight, but the circulation pool is on a lower weight, the new coins are going to disappear out of circulation through Gresham's law. And so it's hard to know. But
yeah, I didn't use this argument.
No, you didn't use this argument, but you seem to be hinting at the reduction.
Yeah.
I don't really have a lot more to say. It was really excellent, and thank you.
No problem. Thank you very much, Oliver and Alain, again. I do think that in the audience there will probably be many questions, so I am brimming of questions, and I have a few words to say while others are please thinking about their own questions, and you can use the raise your hand function or use the chat function to contribute questions. Alain, I think you have wonderfully rephrased the question of wealthy or not wealthy Seleucids, and this is certainly the way to go. And then you have looked systematically of how to specify the income side, and then even more interestingly, how to understand the demands on the treasury, the structural demands, the recurring demands, and then the many exceptional demands. And I found particularly striking the point you made about the volatility of the Seleucid territory as a very great challenge. So that's particularly from the general historian's perspective that I am complementing the specific numismatic aspects. So if I have questions, and I do have many, they would rather look at each specific category and try to specify our understanding of these. And one that I'm particularly interested in, and Ben probably too, is the question of the so-called temple robberies. I still believe that we are slightly misguided by the sources hostile to the Seleucids, because first of all, we should first try to understand what was the general income that Seleucid kings and other kings generated from sanctuaries in their kingdom. So what was the general expectation of income or even subsidies? It's quite interesting that Antiochus III had had obliged himself to annually subsidize the cult in Jerusalem. And so we have that detailed knowledge for the Jerusalem temple, thanks to especially two Maccabees, a very, very murky source, but yet many of the details are quite interesting, showing us that expectations of income were generated by the priest, by the priestly elite, and we may actually reconstrue temple robbery rather in taking what had been owed to the king for quite some time, what had been withheld from the king. And I wonder whether also the other instances earlier, the 211 incidents from Ecbatana, or the final episode in Antiochus IV's life was it Gabai in Persia, whether they may not also be better understood as the king now perhaps taking more after what had been considered due to him had not been paid, and a conflict had arisen, and then there is kind of a violent conflict resolution. So I'm rather wondering whether it is possible to describe more generally what the income, largely speaking, for the royal treasury from the sanctuaries empire-wide had been, and which proportion then, or which role these violent incidents reported in sources hostile to the kings should have in the broader picture.
Your point is very well made. I think that what we have here, what we meet is the question of the tax policy of the Seleucids beyond episodes or cases of temple plunder or etc. The way the Seleucids could give also privileges to these temples, the way they dealt with the elites locally, certainly played a role. Baitokaike, among others. We have a specialist of Baitokaike in the audience, a Chicago student. Maybe he will intervene. He wants to intervene on the question. But yes, indeed, that's the big question. Maybe the difference between what happened in the Ptolemaic kingdom. We know the difficulties that the Ptolemies had with their sanctuaries, but what we have here in the Seleucid kingdom seems to be more, at some point, more brutal than what we have in the Ptolemaic kingdom. Maybe it's the sources that give some prejudice against the Seleucids, but yet the hand was probably more brutal than that of the Ptolemies, or maybe because the Ptolemies had to make concessions, but yet they managed to accumulate more than the Seleucids.
Well, that comparison is quite interesting, and it would be good to consult with Ptolemaic specialists. From my slightly outsider's perspective, I would assume that in the Ptolemaic kingdom, the temples were more part of the government structure, more systematically needed to actually control the population, and therefore the temples and the priest elite did play a very different role in systematically mediating between the king and the subjects. I think a role that the temples, generally speaking, in the Seleucid kingdom did not have. So that would be my immediate response. But I see that Francois has raised his hands. Welcome back to our group, Francois, please.
So welcome everyone. I was delighted just to hear you and just to have a chance just to see Alain, my dear friend Alain, and Oliver together. And of course, the argument were extremely well made. I was just wondering about something which has not been evoked, and I'm more turning to Oliver than to Alain. It's about the gold coinages for the Seleucid kingdom. So we know that for the Ptolemaic there is a lot of gold, and we are well informed about that. But for the Seleucids, it turns that systematically or nearly systematically, we do have a very few coins and as many overseas as coins. So it's very, very difficult. So it means to estimate the original production. So in terms of ratio, of survival ratio, there's such a big difference systematically between the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. And my question to Oliver is, do you have any idea why the survival ratio for the Seleucid for gold is so low? That would be one question. I'm not considering seriously that we are missing a tremendous, gigantic amount of gold produced in the Seleucid, but still, it's really a real difference, especially since silver is well documented. But really, with gold, we have a feeling that gold were produced in a way we don't in a size, let's say, we have difficulties to estimate, but then it was possibly remelted more. So I mean, the survival ratio is very different. That's one point. It's more for Oliver. And the second point is just to try to frame the Seleucids with not the Ptolemies, but with the Parthians after. We know that for Seleucia and the Tigris, actually, if you are looking at coin circulation, and admittedly it's bronze, it's nothing, but there are more coins for, I mean, as far as we can judge, in terms of monetary intensity, and there's a full of biases there. But it seems that certainly during the Parthians, after 145, let's say, Seleucia and the Tigris was more monetized than before. And if you are turning to the production, if you are trying to estimate, and I've some studies, some dye studies unpublished there about all the production of tetradrachms for the Parthians, it's gigantic. So it seems that yes, but it's more gigantic after it's a bit later. It's with Phraates the fourth. But then that would be my. Actually, I have just one question. It's more for Oliver. It's about the survival ratio. How could you explain that the survival ratio for gold in the Seleucid Empire is so low? Your microphone.
Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. Yeah, this is a difficult question. I think it's very clear that the gold was struck on a much lower in much lower quantity, but I think a large amount must have been melted down. That's the only, or otherwise, carried off and disappeared into the melting pot. And so we only have the limited, few pieces, like some reigns and mints. You have, one or two specimens surviving, and I think the only explanation is that it must have been melted down at some point. And I think it's clear that the ability to almost entirely destroy a coin issue by melting was possible. We have tetradrachms of some of the very late Seleukids that are only known from one or two specimens, and obviously they must have been remelted and restruck in order for that to happen.
And not to prolong the conversation, because that's a side issue, but possibly it could be interesting to have in mind what happened in medieval times, for which we are well informed. It means that for gold, there's a difference. Either it's a massive production, and then gold is softer. So normally dyes have a very larger average productivity. But what happened most of the time is that gold, just for very, very limited issues, because they are just the available metal is really limited. So people could strike for just for 2 kilograms, let's say in modern words, of gold, and then it's finished. And then and so there are strikes for Middle Ages. We know that there are strikes for 300 coins, 400 coins, and then it was just for a specific expenditure, very limited, and obviously then dyes were not used to their full productivity. So it could happen also but then, and that of course could explain why the survival ratio is so low. Well, we are not forced to think about a massive melting down. But
thank you. That sounds quite plausible. Ben, you are next.
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you to both of you. So given all of this valuable information and insight, would it be possible to reconstruct a kind of Seleucid annual budget? Right? That is, we know certain things about revenue streams, we know certain things about expenditures, and I know that every year was different. But do we have enough information to sort of focus in maybe on one peacetime year? And I understand, from this wonderful lecture that in the Seleucid Empire, I know this will be a paradoxical sentence, but the instability created a kind of structural deficit, right? Even though that's a contradiction in terms, right? But still, could we make some kind of Archimedean point, one year that we know a lot about, where we know that this came in and this came in, or at least percentages? That is, and I think Oliver was pointing to this. Okay, so would tariffs constitute 15%? Even if we couldn't come up with figures, do we have some sense of the relative value of the revenue streams? And then on the other side, what would a peacetime year be in terms of expenditures? In other words, you ask wealthy Seleucids, it's a great question. But if I make $1 million a year and I'm spending $1.2 million a year, I sound like a wealthy man, but I'm actually, after 5 years, $1 million in debt. So you can have the sense of being very wealthy and actually be broke.
Well, I don't know in the audience if people can provide a better answer. I'm not sure it's possible to provide to have an idea of a budget of the Seleucid state at any period, really. There are estimates, as I quoted those of Makis Apergis, which are built on an estimate how many talents per 1,000 people, and also those of Christelle Fischer-Beauvais, which are more or less of the same order. As you said, also, it must have varied quite a lot from one year to the other, depending on whether it's war or not, depending whether a province is within the kingdom or not, etc. So the variations in terms of income of the Seleucids must have been immense. And this is why giving let's say, 15,000 or 17 or 19,000, it's a bit dangerous, to my opinion, but others might have other views. So I quoted these numbers, but I refrain from building too much over that.
Thank you.
Until we have some source that provides better evidence.
Yeah, I think that was very cautious as you did it. And it's difficult to go further at this point, at least. Funny in Ben's question was at peacetime. So the question is,
when was that?
When was that? But
when was that? Yeah.
Sylvie, nice to see you in our group. Please, you come next.
Hello, Sylvie.
Hello, Alain. Thank you very much for your talk. I have a comment and a question. I think two are linked. The question at the end is that I would like you to specify again the connection you make between your conclusions about cash and political instability of the Seleucid Empire. But before that, I think I would like to go back to your comparison with Ptolemaic Empire Ptolemaic Egypt, not Ptolemaic Empire, and especially with the relationship with the temples. There was a very simple reason why the Ptolemies didn't have. I mean, we don't have stories of temple plunders in Egypt because the Ptolemies, as pharaohs, were the head of the religious system, meaning that all Ptolemy II had to do was a reform of the Upper Moira, and he diverted basically, on the one hand, diverted all the tax revenues from the temple to the royal treasure, and on the other hand, he also subordinated the temples to politically to his power, because then he gave them, he took from them their revenues, and then he gave them their revenue back. So that prompts me perhaps also the idea that basically the Ptolemaic Egypt was far more centralized, whereas we could perhaps think that the Seleucids had to renounce part of their potential tax revenues to the benefit of the polis, in order for them to ensure local policy and so on. So perhaps the fact that they renounced their part of their cash in this way could have been a factor of stability before becoming a factor of instability on the macro scale. So I would like to have your thoughts on that. And also, again, if you could specify, because, okay, it's perfectly clear that if you don't have money or cash to pay for soldiers, so you're less able to suppress a revolt. But before the revolt, why would cash be a greater the lack of cash would be a greater liability than the old argument about space, for instance, in terms of the instability of empire.
Well, thank you for your questions. I tried to answer maybe what you are pointing to is the structure of the kingdom. I think it's, of course, an excellent point, which is so different between the Ptolemies and the Seleucid state. Much more unified, much more diverse, scattered all over the planet, let's say, for the Seleukids, and difficulties to maintain the unity and difficulty to maintain the structure. There are things that are, let's say, for the detail. I begin with a point of detail, and for instance, the coins, a large part of the coins circulating in the Seleucid kingdom in the first half of the 2nd century were coins coming from Pamphylia, of the 4 cities of Pamphylia. And Andy Meadows has suggested, and it's plausible, that why did these cities why did they begin to mint in the 220s? It's at the time that they were liberated by Antioch, or well, what does it mean? Why did the Seleucids say, okay, this is a territory we have liberated, now it will be Seleucid coinage. We mint Seleucid coinage there. And what you observe is something different. It's tetradrachms minted by the city. And this autonomy of the city is not pure, let's say, fictitious. It corresponds to a form of reality, at least in my opinion. It's not that the king simply said, okay, I have 1,000 talents, I give you 1,000 talents, and you mint these coins for me. This could happen in other circumstances, in other cases, but here it's more complex. I think it's a relationship between the king and the cities that were in his philia, one way or other. So it's different structure from what we have within the Seleucid kingdoms, Ptolemaic kingdom, where we know very well what happened to the polis of Cyprus, for instance. They were completely eliminated. It's a central administration that took in charge. The polis survived officially, but they had no consistence, the way they had within the Seleucid kingdom. But beyond it, it's a more general question. To my opinion, the weakness, you ask us, you make this point, what's the weakness of the Seleucid administration? I think that Laurent Capdetré, in his book about Seleucid administration, has a very good point. At the local level, provinces were very well administered. The problem, the difficulty came from the relationship between the center, the king, and the various provinces, and the temptation for each of the satraps to become his own master. It's very clear with Iodatus in Bactria, very clear also for Asia Minor at various periods. So the temptation, because you have this little kingdom that works very well, and to maintain the link with the center, that is the difficulty that the Seleukids met. And I think that, of course, it was also difficulty the Achaemenids met before, but there was the huge accumulation of money, of the reserves, that made a revolt very difficult to maintain, unless you were Egypt for a while because it was an independent country. But for an Achaemenid satrap, maintaining a kind of state of revolt against a great king didn't work the way it worked for a Hellenistic, Greek Hellenistic satrap within the kingdom. And the fact that the king was not immediately able to quell the revolt, to suppress the revolt with a huge army, made, let's say, for the satraps, there was the possibility, it was plausible to revolt, and the revolts have a very good chance to succeed. And when the revolt succeed, you weaken even more the center, etc. It's a process that nourishes itself some way. That's the way I would see these things. But you're right.
So that really boils down to the capacity of the central authorities to pay an army.
I think
that's okay.
It was all the capacity to mobilize very large armies, and of course the Achaemenid armies. Well, they of course paid their men also, but probably a larger part was paid in kind than for the Hellenistic armies, depending on mercenaries and soldiers that expect their tetradrachms at the end of the month. That's it.
Thank you for this exchange. Andrew Monson comes next.
Yeah, thank you, Alain. That was very interesting. I want to just follow up again on the question of different structures between the Ptolemaic and Seleucid kingdom, and maybe one more example for your list of perhaps questionable cases. I was thinking of reading recently in Polybius Book 5 about the Molon revolt, and I'm always struck by this discussion of what Hermias does when he pays the soldiers, because apparently the king doesn't have any money to pay the soldiers, and he has to rely on his minister to provide him the money. And this is part of the struggle at court between Hermias and Epigenes. And he says, okay, I'll pay the soldiers, but only if you can take Epigenes off this campaign. And it just gives me pause for thought about to what extent the Seleucid kings are, in a sense, pawns of their courts, of their collaborators at the provincial level, as well as the representatives of great provincial families at court in Antioch or Seleucia. And I was thinking of cases like Achaeos in Asia Minor, large gift estate holders, people who are obviously clearly, I'm thinking of the grandfather of the usurper, but even all the way through the family. It seems that the idea that the Seleucid provinces were well run locally, yes and no, maybe, because it could be a little bit like what John Maas argued recently for the Seleucid Empire with Ashama the Vampire, his article in the Ashama volumes, an idea that, it's an empire that works because of cooperation between local elites in the center, who are, of course, taking out enormous rents in order to enrich themselves. And then they can step in like Hermias in a campaign like this and provide the money when it's necessary. So in this case, then, where you have this information asymmetry, where you have local elites who have all of these rents and power and things like that, they may have all the more reason to keep their assets out of, let's say, liquid form that can be easily taken by the king or easily accounted for. I'm just thinking of the contrast always in the back of my mind with Ptolemaic Egypt, where it seems like the court is, for the most part, I mean, other than maybe some provincial elites outside of Egypt, but for the most part, they're kind of under the watchful eye of the king. Or maybe there are weak kings, but generally it's more centralized. So I was just thinking about that imperial aspect, the information asymmetry, and whether the empire worked more because of cooperation with rent-seeking local elites than because the king was wealthy.
Yeah, you make a very good point, especially with Archaios and also Molon revolt. I think I should think more about that, but I would think that it would even reinforce massively my argument. In fact, thank you so much. Yeah, that's for sure. For Ashama the vampire, we have, well, the question is that Ashama himself is on both sides. He's in Egypt and he's in Mesopotamia. And maybe these local rulers, or let's say within the Seleucid Empire, thought that their interests were not at the center, because maybe there was no center properly the way there was within the Achaemenid Empire. And that may have, let's say, they might have made different choices and to take the risk of revolt, because the main assets were local. There's no point in maintaining the link with the center, which is less obvious with Ashama in Egypt, for instance, or his successors.
Thank you. And before I pass on the word to Stone, I'd just like to say a goodbye from my part, because I have to run into class, but the discussion will continue and Ben will take it to the end. So Stone, please.
Yes, thank you, Altai, and thank you, Professor Bresson, for that brilliant paper. So I'm sort of have a I guess, a macro historical question, and also just picking on the thread, which is what all of these findings can inform us about the, I guess, the overall economic productivity of the Seleucid Empire or any other similar structures. And I seem to get the impression that the findings in this paper sort of suggest that the economic productivity in the Seleucid realm, well, it was less productive compared to that of the Ptolemies. But then I also, because given that discussion about whether the empire was administered very effectively on a local level, I do get the sense that whether that really reflects a low economic productivity, which I guess can be defined as economic output per unit of input, as opposed to that all of that output and all of that productivity was simply being utilized on a local level, and it doesn't really contribute much to the wealth of the imperial government. And I think that's sort of the question that I'm asking is, what kind of implication can we draw from the the idea that so when we say the Seleucids are not so when we're asking whether the Seleucids are wealthy or not, are we thinking about simply the government, the emperors, the rulers, or are we talking about the realm, the kingdom, the national economy as a whole? Thank you.
Oh, thank you for your question. Indeed, it's also a major question. I would say that sorry for that. I would say that the provinces just like such as Asia Minor, Phoenicia in general, Bactria, were immensely rich in this region, in this period. It's not a question of economic difficulties, etc. We have the impression that, let's say, it's a pretty rich region and rather richer than before for many reasons. maybe among others because there was more trade links. We see, for instance, number of, for what it's worth, the number of cities, the building policies, especially in the second more than in the third, but yet even starting at the end of the 4th century, maybe let's say it's a global economic explanation because money was cheaper after Alexander, because money circulates massively in the Hellenistic kingdoms, in the Hellenistic world. The Achaemenid kings were, the Achaemenid king is a Uncle Scrooge, if you like, keeps everything for himself. Money doesn't circulate. Whereas in the Hellenistic world, money circulates massively. And so the fact that money circulates massively, it's easier to get money, it's easier to borrow money, it's easier also to do business. And this is a general answer. And we have, if we had provincial examples, let's say Asia Minor, Syria and Phoenicia, and Bactria, we see prosperity, agricultural prosperity, for instance, in the continuity of the previous centuries in Bactria. But we cannot say that in this period there was any kind of economic decay or things like that. The question was the capacity of the king to capture the enough money to wage his wars to fund his army, because this was the key of the system and the state in general, but above all the army. So there are two aspects in my answer. The first one, I'd say that it's a fairly prosperous period and we could develop that more, but that yet the state was not organized in such a way as to capture enough cash to have reserves. Although he captured a lot of cash every year, maybe 10,000 or 12,000, I don't know. But the question is the balance, how much remains at the end of each year. As was the case was made just a minute ago, if you spend more than you receive every year, you're in debt, you are in difficulties all the time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Am I able to speak now? Like, can everybody hear me? That's kind of my question. Yes.
Yes, please.
Oh, okay. Yes. I'm just okay. So yeah. Thank you very much, Alan, for the prepared presentation. I'm just having a specific example that I was thinking of in response to the example you gave as to why Ptolemaic kings were Ptolemaic III was able to give massively more than other Hellenistic rulers to relieve the Rhodians. I remember there's one inscription, or sorry, that's not inscription, from one papyrus source. So that one mentioned that when Ptolemy III showed up with his army in Syria, then the local people from Soloi, right? So the people from a native city of Seleucia, they intercepted a delivery of 1,500 talents of silver, which is supposed to be delivered to Queen Laodice at Ephesus, who was at a personal rivalry against her elder son Seleucid II. Right. So around the time that was about mid to late 3rd century BC, which is quite close to the event that you were talking about. So I was thinking, is there a connection to be made between these two events, that the Ptolemaic kings actually got a lot of money from this campaign, and therefore he was much more he was in a better position to offer us to make such generous offers to the Rhodians. So I'm not sure if such connection was there very apparently, but I just wonder if you have thought on this. Thank you.
I'm not sure we should make the connection, but thank you for pointing to this question. But I think that let's say the structural capacity of the Ptolemies was such that they didn't need a precise event or a delivery in specific delivery of silver just to fund the help they provide the Rhodians. I think it's, for them, it was part of their, let's say, when they use their reserve, their treasury, more than receiving specifically this or that delivery of silver. I'm not sure. I think this was used for wars, local wars. Of course, also, well, plundering enemy territory is always a great source. There's no doubt, but I'm not sure this justifies the what you just mentioned for the delivery to the Rhodians.
Yeah. I was thinking because it's always easier, like for us to show generosity based on the money that's not originally yours, right? So I thought that might be a connection, though. Like we do need more specific connection to prove it. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, again, thank you to everybody. Thank you to Dr. Bresson and to Dr. Hoover for these wonderful presentations. I want to mention that our next Seleukid lecture will be on December 20th, 2023. I hope I'm getting the names correct. Elia Vieira Faria from the University of Swansea will speak about the contempt etched in metal, coinage, defacement, and resistance in the Seleucid Empire. So we thank everybody for participating and for this very high level and wonderful discussion. We all benefited from it. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Altai. Thank you all.